Now, what was the Jeffrey Epstein case really about, and what does it have to do with Russia? So, the East-West conflict during the Cold War poisoned all aspects of society, especially in the West. So, we've seen in countries such as Italy, Germany, Middle America, South America, all kinds of places, we saw suitcases full of cash being handed around by the CIA, the KGB. They tried to buy influence, and they wanted to prevent the other side from gaining political ground. So Western countries pride themselves in being democracies in the tradition of the Enlightenment movement, but for all intents and purposes, it was a bunch of suitcases full of cash. And to a certain degree, the average taxpayer will understand certain kinds of intelligence operations to protect against, for example, communism. But where does it end? How many operations are there really? How many operations are we willing to accept? And are there any boundaries? Is there any specific law that says you can't do more operations than X amount, X number? Is there any sort of enforcement? Is there any sort of surveillance that is transparent to the public? No, of course not. We do not know how far this goes. And if you can do this 100 times, you can do it 1,000 times, and then there is no end to it. All kinds of politicians become criminals with a special type of license for it. And same goes for the economy. Large corporations, mid-sized corporations, all kinds of corporations. The people in charge, they become criminals by selling technology to the Eastern Bloc, or they're doing all kinds of illegal stuff, and they have a special license for it. As soon as you appear as a confidential asset, a confidential source, or you may even do some complex missions for an intelligence service, then you are set. You are good to go. I recently made a video, you can find that on my YouTube channel here, a video about the insane amounts of corruption and waste in the Russian military and the American military. And so every empire needs to reward its loyal servants, and you reward them with dirty money. You reward them with access to all kinds of sex, and you reward them with special protection, so they don't have to follow the law like everybody else. They don't have to pay regular taxes. They are a special class of people. And to be a member of that club, you need some sort of security clearance, because if you get in trouble, if you get caught by, let's say, some regular dudes at the FBI or Justice Department or some regular police detectives, if you get caught, if you messed up, or you just got unlucky, somebody up high needs to pull that card that says national security, right? That this guy is some sort of a confidential asset. We needed this guy to access certain people and circles, and this is so important, way more important than the crime that he actually did. In fact, he did that crime because we told him to. This is all very important. So you can't put this guy in prison, at least not for long. You have to make this investigation go away. Now, if one of those assets becomes a problem, if they suddenly grow a conscience, or they want to defect because they think they can get a better deal over in Russia or in China, then of course you can destroy that person, because that person has been a criminal. And not everything about this asset, confidential informant relationship, not everything has been recorded, or the recordings are not, the files are not public, so you can burn that person, especially if that person has been partying pretty hard. Now, normally when you send an asset to meet people, when you send out a confidential source to make contact with crooked individuals who smuggle weapons or certain bits of nuclear technology to rogue states, if you want to get into those kind of circles, your asset needs to be able to party hard. They need to be able to do a lot of cocaine and drink a lot of booze and, that sort of thing. And so when you need to destroy a source, when you need to destroy an asset, you can usually destroy him with all kinds of stuff that he's done. And that's how this game is played. Work hard, play hard. We've all heard this before. And remember, if somebody wants to be a big shot in politics, in government, in industry, if you want to be a big shot, you need to visit a certain type of university, and they're very selective. And if you are in that university, you need to get a place in one of those elite, very old student societies. Right, and how you get in there? Well, if your parents have been in the club, you have a good shot at being in the club. You have to have a certain type of personality, and you need to be able to party. They need to like you too. It's not just that you need to be smart and hardworking and loyal to them. You need to be able to party just for fun. And also, it becomes important later on when you are in a position of power and you're an asset. Then, of course, you already know how to party because you learned it at university. So this is kind of how this system is played. And this is in all kinds of systems. It doesn't matter if it's a communist system or a older European aristocratic system, or if it's a modern democratic type system. And there's so many examples of special protection. So one or the other person might still remember German Chancellor Helmut Kohl. That was the big obese guy, and his career was financed with secret sources of money and secret stashes of money, and that system was betrayed by a communist asset, and so the communists knew all about it. But they didn't make the information public. Instead, they made a deal with the West. And so this information was kept under wraps, and in return, Soviet, communist East Germany got some fresh money. Yeah, got some fresh loans. That was one example that became public. Then we saw Western parts, Western technology inside of Russian military vehicles, tanks, armored cars, all kinds of stuff. So certain corporations such as Bosch from Germany, who make all these engine control systems and that sort of thing, Bosch got a bit into trouble, but nothing really will come out of it, because I'm sure at some point somebody will say we got special permission for that, or nobody complained. We asked, nobody complained. Then you had this thing with Donald Trump and Deutsche Bank, big international bank, and when nobody else would give Donald Trump money, they would give him huge loans. And some of these loans were underwritten by a Russian bank, the VTB, which is majority owned by the government. And over the last couple of years, we've seen a couple of whistleblowers die under mysterious circumstances. There's been press coverage of that. Valentin Bergsmith, William Bergsmith, Thomas Bors, they're all dead because they relayed information to the FBI and Justice Department about some, weird things or possible weird things. And these people are dying right now. And a lot has been said about Donald Trump and how he wanted to make more and more business with the Russians, but it wasn't just Trump. All kinds of corporations, all kinds of Western big corporations, they all wanted business with the Russians, and a lot of them did business with the Russians. So there's nothing truly special about the Trump thing, even though a lot of people kept focusing on that. And let's remember, who was the mentor of Donald Trump? It was a man called Roy Cohn, and he had an operation running once during the Cold War, sort of an entrapment, scheme. They tried to compromise suspected communists or whoever, try to entrap them with sex, and maybe even illegal types of sex. And a lot of it is still classified, a lot of it is still in the shadow, but that sort of thing makes it sort of likely that Donald Trump Donald Trump has had some sort of special permission, and it's not a far stretch to imagine these things, right? So Trump asks around his contacts, is it okay if I do Russian business? And the contacts might say, well, go on, do Russian business, let the intelligence community handle the rest, it's gonna be fine, just give us regular reports, just give us some secret reports on what you're doing, and then it all will be fine, you will be protected. And it's even possible that he's listed somewhere as a confidential source, a confidential asset, right? I mean, he got in trouble a couple of times, even before his political career. And when no bank wanted to lend him money, suddenly Deutsche Bank came around. Why was that? Was there some special thing going on? Did he become a confidential source? I mean, he was going around all over the world and dealing with Russian oligarchs and other people, so that might be a valuable source of information to the FBI, CIA, whatever. Maybe that is the reason why Trump never really got into complete trouble. I mean, he's in a lot of trouble. There's so many places and things going on where he has some serious problems. But so far, he always got away, and that might be something that repeats itself in the future. Maybe he has this special protection, this magic wand called national security. And then Joe Biden wins the election. All the Democrats, all the leftists, they're all happy that finally this Trump nightmare is over and finally they have a left-wing president, Joe Biden. But the problem is Joe Biden's career was handled, or has been handled, by the mighty DuPont clan. The chemical corporation that became really big with gunpowder and government contracts, and then they did all this plutonium and that sort of thing. And the DuPont family rules Delaware pretty much like princes like European old-style aristocracy. So you can't get any more, let's say, conservative, if you want to use that worn-out term. Can't get more conservative than the DuPont clan in certain ways. So that's who runs Joe Biden. And the DuPont clan once shipped or built large chemical factories in the Soviet Union. And they were so big that the Soviets could actually catch up in the production of certain assets that are needed for explosives. And that kept the war machine of the Soviets going. At the same time, DuPont made gunpowder for the US military, and DuPont also made plutonium for nuclear weapons, meaning they made money both ways, by increasing the threat from the Soviets and by diminishing the threat from the Soviets. See, that's kind of a special permission deal right there. Because they did get to build this factory. And the DuPonts never got into trouble for building those factories. Then another example, 2013, investigative journalist Greg Palast was thrown out of Kazakhstan, which is run by an oligarch who was once the head of intelligence. And so Greg Palast wanted to uncover vast amounts of bribes that facilitated American companies getting to be active in Kazakhstan. We're talking ExxonMobil, and even the Brits, British Petroleum, and some other companies. So it's perfectly illegal to pay bribes to other countries to get that sort of those sort of deals. Perfectly illegal, but the handler called James Giffen, he got away with it. As a federal judge, and this judge was told that this is all national security and this is about securing vital resources for the United States. So this man goes free. He had special permission. See, national security is the magic wand. And so when we get to the Jeffrey Epstein case, it's not just about an older rich man who bought himself these young girls so many of them, and sort of used his money to stifle investigations, make these problems go away. We've heard a lot of information about hidden cameras and hidden microphones and that sort of thing, and he had all these friends, and it's just hard to say who is on what kind of video, right? I mean, it's one thing if your name is Donald Trump and you're partying with Jeffrey Epstein with adult women. That's one thing. But yeah, it's pretty obvious that Jeffrey Epstein had some sort of status with the FBI and possibly even the CIA. So certain documents came to light which indicate that he was a source for the FBI, and he got special protection. And he also bragged a lot about working for the CIA. And this is not even the end of it. So Epstein got a very soft deal years ago. Deal with prosecutors because of the influence of Sigal Mandelker. That's a woman. And in March 2017, President Donald Trump nominated Mandelker for a high position in the Department of Finance, and it was a post about combating terrorism and financial intelligence. So this is about catching people who undermine international sanctions. Let's say Iran trying to buy certain parts and pieces, certain technologies for their military or the nuclear program, that sort of thing. Or somebody brokering deals for technology for North Korea. So this stuff is investigated. And to investigate this sort of stuff, you need confidential sources. You need assets. People like Jeffrey Epstein, who know people, and those people, they know people, and on and on and on and on. So this is kind of how this works. We had investigative reporter Julie K. Brown, who wrote her book and who published her article in the Miami Herald, big newspaper owned by a really big company. Her book, Perversion of Justice, was released by HarperCollins, huge corporation, and she worked with Netflix and HBO for television programs. So when all these productions are done, the world will have forgotten the case. The world will have moved on. And so mainstream media, when they cover the Epstein case, they try to avoid the intelligence aspect altogether. And what about the new generation of Jeffrey Epsteins? So the Epstein case doesn't really help you as ammo for the Republican Party or for the Democratic Party, because Epstein was friendly with everybody. And so, then we saw the reports of Whitney Webb, and she talked more about all these intelligence backgrounds. And Epstein Epstein was working for the Israeli Mossad. Epstein was probably working for the CIA. Then the old Robert Maxwell probably worked for multiple intelligence agencies. And it's hard to say what the primary intelligence agency was. If you're talking about a country such as Israel, which is tiny, and Israel was built by the Anglo-Americans, so Israeli intelligence is really Anglo intelligence, even though many people in Israel will probably not understand the scope of that. If you read Whitney Webb's stories, you get the impression that she believes oligarchs have taken over the government, right? They do their own thing, and they compromise the FBI, and they compromise other agencies, and they compromise politicians, so that sort of thing. But if you reconstruct the secret history, the hidden history, it's always this Anglo Empire at the center of it. And the Anglo Empire has its government agencies, and these government agencies, they sort of recruited mafia-type figures. people that were close to Jeffrey Epstein or even worked with Epstein. So you look at these old alcohol smuggling dynasties, the rum runners. You look at the Bronfman family. Samuel Bronfman made his money with smuggling booze during the Prohibition. And at some point there was Prohibition in America, and there was Prohibition in Canada. So depending on where the Prohibition was, you would smuggle the booze in this direction or the other direction. And all this booze smuggling, all this rum running made more and more citizens into criminals, and they had to pay protection money. All these illegal bars, and there were just hundreds of thousands of bars, illegal bars. Every owner became a criminal, and they had to pay protection money. And all these police officers became criminals, and everybody was trying to profit from that. So if you compromise even the average citizen, you can control the average citizen. And the FBI doesn't have the resources or the will to run all these bars themselves. I mean, imagine how many train assets you would need to run hundreds of thousands of illegal bars and smuggle every significant shipment of booze. It's not doable. Not for the FBI, not for the Justice Department, not for the CIA. And so what do you do as a government? Well, you hire criminals to do it for you. We had the National Crime Syndicate. We had Charles Lucky Luciano, Abner Zwillman, Meyer Lansky, and these sort of people. And they also bought hotels, special type of hotels. They also bought these clubs and casinos. So this is also where you could compromise people everywhere. And of course, if you're a citizen, if you're a privileged citizen and you're kind of in the club, you got to get you had the special license for, using prostitutes and doing drugs and all that stuff and drinking when it was illegal. So years later, the descendants of Samuel Bronfman worked with Leslie Wexner, which was supposedly the source of much of Epstein's money. And really important for Bronfman's career was Louis Rosenstiel. And Rosenstiel in 1922 had a supposed chance meeting at the Côte d'Azur, a meeting with none other than Winston Churchill. And the New York Times reported about Winston Churchill telling him to invest in distilleries because the prohibition would be lifted in a couple of months or years. And so Rosenstiel went to Wall Street banking house Lehman Brothers, got a loan, bought these distilleries, and then became, of course, filthy rich with booze when it became legal again. Rosenstiel was friends with the lawyer Roy Cohn, who became a mentor of Donald Trump. And they founded the organization American Jewish League Against Communism. So a lot of this was about battling communism. As I've said before, the East-West conflict poisoned all of society. Everything became espionage. Everybody became sort of a criminal. And that's how the system was run. Rosenstiel was friendly with the FBI chief J. Edgar Hoover. And the FBI, of course, was tasked with battling communism, and therefore this relationship was really productive for them. The FBI got its sources, the mafia guys got their money, and lots of people fell into these traps, booze and drugs and sex. And Rosenstiel in 1957 picked Louis Nichols, who was close to FBI Chief Hoover, picked Nichols as vice president for the Schenley corporation empire, the big corporation. And so at some point, prostitution became more illegal, and it was there was more law enforcement, and of course that drove up the prices somewhat, and the mafia could organize prostitution, and that's how you could get a lot of people into trouble. When Rosenstiel divorced his fourth wife, Susan Kaufman, she told a lot of, she gave us a lot of information. Rosenstiel allegedly staged extravagant parties with very young prostitutes, pleasuring certain guests, very powerful guests. And so lots of talk about hidden microphones and these sort of things that we've heard over and over again. Bronfman and Rosenstiel got together with gangster boss Meyer Lansky. And Meyer Lansky had a close relationship with the CIA and U.S. military intelligence. And this goes back to World War II, when there was a cooperation between the United States and certain mafia groups in Europe, especially Italy. So you had Lansky, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. One of these operations was called Operation Underworld. And of course, in public, the FBI for decades claimed that something like a mafia really doesn't exist. You had books such as the book from Douglas Valentine called The CIA is Organized Crime, How Illegal Operations Corrupt America and the World. That book gives us more information about that. And the CIA counterintelligence chief, James Jesus Angleton, legendary figure, he pushed really hard for more ties to organized crime. Especially guys like Lansky. And if you study kind of the Cold War era and the CIA black operations, you study things like the MK Ultra program, or was the umbrella name for a lot of programs. You had Bluebird and Artichoke and all that. You will find a lot of mafia guys finding test subjects for certain new drugs and certain new types of interrogation techniques. And this was part of this cooperation. Lansky goes way back to the OSS, before there even was a CIA, and journalist Ed Reed claimed Lansky built up a drug ring with the OSS or CIA to entrap certain government officials. And then you had all these scandals that became public. You had the Franklin case in Omaha, Nebraska, uncovered partially by former Senator John DeCamp. You had the Washington callboy ring and all these scandals that came to light to a certain degree. And that shows us that this is a very vast system, and it's a system of privilege. Certain people get into the club and they have special permission, special protection. They can have all the fun in the world. When they get into trouble, they're being protected. If they mess up too badly, they're taken out of circulation. This is kind of how it works. And this system couldn't have existed without the East-West conflict. You know, this East-West conflict was a godsend and was sort of created artificially. It was constantly exacerbated by these technology sales to the Soviet Union. And so the problem was created, and then a solution was offered of this national security state, of this total saturation with espionage and sex traps and anything that went with it. So there are no elders of Zion behind Jeffrey Epstein and all these characters, because the elders of Zion do not exist. This was an invention of British intelligence, the Department for Propaganda and Misinformation. So a couple of people were recruited once by the mighty British aristocratic colonial empire. They were recruited to act like the heads of the private merchant banks, but it was the empire itself that created modern fractional reserve banking, a system that was way more beneficial to an empire than what the other empires had done, such as the French or the Portuguese. The Epstein case is not ammunition for Republicans against the Democrats or for Democrats against Republicans. Everybody is kind of in on it. Everybody important gets compromised to a certain degree. And the Epstein case is also not a pretext to make Russia appear better than it is, right? It's there's a lot of powerful people that have multiple passports, and some of them they work primarily for the Russian Empire, some of them work primarily for the Western Empire. It's hard to tell, and it's really, really complicated to figure out the individual asset. Russia nowadays considers itself to be the third Rome, the third iteration of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire had a system of the 10%, the privileged 10%, while life for the other 90% was pretty miserable. And so you have Epstein-like figures in Russia. You have all these pimps, and you have these front organizations trying to find young pretty girls and young pretty boys all over Russia. Kids from poor families. The same kind of scheme that Epstein used, or the mafia used back in the old days, and the government entrapment programs he used. You find these poor kids and you use them and you pay them. It's the same in Russia. And you can bet that the East-West conflict is used as a pretext over there too, to have a national security state, to saturate everything with espionage and compromising material. So you can destroy anybody in Russia. The system can recruit anybody and make that person a privileged person. In so-called alternative media, you saw a lot of reports on the Epstein case that made it appear as if only the Western Empire was sort of immoral or in decline. And they made it appear as if Russia was the big Renaissance, the Christian conservative empire, when it was just a rebranding. What the Russians have done, I mean, they spent a crazy amount of money on luxury, and you can bet they spend money on sexual entertainment too.